Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into a fascinating and, well, honestly, kind of terrifying journey. We're looking at how the ultimate military secret of World War II, the atomic bomb, managed to escape containment and spread all across the globe.
So how exactly did a technology this complex, this dangerous, and initially guarded so intensely by just one nation turn into a global commodity? We're essentially tracking the opening of a modern-day Pandora's box here. It's a box that completely rewired global security, and honestly might even dictate our very survival today.
To get a handle on all of this, we'll be walking through 5 key phases today: the original atomic monopoly, espionage and the Soviet bomb, the atoms for peace era, global proliferation accelerates, and finally, ambiguity and black markets.
All right, let's kick things off with Section 1, the original atomic monopoly.
You know, before the famous Manhattan Project even existed, there was tube alloys. That was the super-secret British World War II code name for the very first research project dedicated to designing an atomic weapon. And what kicked this whole thing off was actually a brilliant piece of calculation back in 1940 by scientists Rudolf Peierls and Otto Frisch. They figured out that, hey, you don't actually need tons and tons of uranium to create a catastrophic explosion. You really only needed a critical mass of about 1 to 10 kilograms of pure uranium-235. To put that in perspective, that's an amount small enough that you could literally just hold it right in your hands. This stunning realization proved the bomb was actually possible, which immediately prompted the US to take action and eventually merge their massive resources with the British effort.
Now, there's a really massive misconception about the dawn of the atomic age that we need to clear up. The actual physics behind the bomb, it was actually reasonably well understood by physicists worldwide at the time. The real secret wasn't the science itself, it was the engineering. It required a staggering budget. We're talking the equivalent of $21 billion today, plus 130,000 workers, and some seriously massive, incredibly dangerous trial and error logistics just to process the fuel and put the devices together. So the US didn't hold a monopoly just because they alone understood the science. They held it because they were literally the only ones with the overwhelming industrial capacity to actually pull it off right in the middle of a global war.
Which brings us to Section 2, espionage and the Soviet bomb.
So, if the engineering was such a massive hurdle, how in the world did the Soviet Union manage to pick the atomic lock so incredibly fast? Well, the answer is espionage. A super tight network of spies basically cracked the monopoly from the inside out. You had Klaus Fuchs, a theoretical physicist who passed highly classified technical data straight out of the ultra-secret lab in Los Alamos. Then there was Harry Gold, acting as the vital courier moving this info, and David Greenglass, who provided crude schematics of the explosion experiments. By handing over these blueprints, they let Soviet scientists completely skip over the deadly, time-consuming criticality experiments. I mean, these were tests the Americans grimly referred to as tickling the dragon's tail.
And the direct result of all that stolen intelligence? A test the Americans dubbed Joe 1. In 1949, the Soviet Union successfully detonated their very first atomic device, which was largely based on that stolen American design. And wow, did this send shockwaves through Washington. The American atomic monopoly was officially shattered way earlier than anyone had anticipated, fundamentally altering the entire balance of global power overnight.
The escalation from that stolen knowledge was just terrifyingly rapid. Just flash forward to 1961, and the Soviets are detonating the Tsar Bomba. The yield on this thing was 50 megatons. Just to wrap your head around that, we're talking about a single thermonuclear weapon with an explosive force equivalent to 10 times the amount of all the explosives used in World War II combined. The arms race was officially in full swing, and humanity was staring straight down the barrel of total annihilation.
Moving right along, let's dive into Section 3, the atoms for peace era.
Right in the thick of this escalating Cold War terror, there was this major geopolitical attempt to totally pivot the reputation of atomic energy. In 1953, President Dwight D. Eisenhower delivered his incredibly famous Atoms for Peace speech to the UN. He made the argument that the only real way to win World War III was to prevent it from happening in the first place. To back this up, his administration launched a massive public relations campaign. They literally toured the country with these mobile exhibit buses to convince everyday people that nuclear technology wasn't just this apocalyptic weapon, but actually a utopian tool for medicine, agriculture, and basically limitless power.
This whole initiative actually led directly to the founding of the International Atomic Energy Agency, or the IAEA. Its dual mission was tricky: monitor weapons to prevent war, but at the same time actively support and share peaceful nuclear research. But here is the great historical paradox of this era. By actively promoting and sharing nuclear technology for peace,
the international community inadvertently normalized it. They ended up spreading the exact dual-use equipment and the scientific know-how needed to build weapons all across the globe.
And that takes us directly into Section 4, Global Proliferation Accelerates.
With all this underlying science spreading, new sovereign powers decided, hey, we need our own seat at the nuclear table. What followed was a rapid chain reaction in proliferation. Back in 1946, the US passed the McMahon Act, which suddenly cut off their British allies from the very nuclear secrets the UK had originally helped discover. Feeling completely betrayed, the UK launched their own program, testing a bomb in 1952. Fast forward a bit, and by the 1960s, France had developed its own arsenal. And then, in 1964, China officially joined the club. The atomic box was blown completely wide open, and the world would just never be the same.
Now, France's approach to all this was highly specific and honestly really fascinating. They developed what they called the force de dissuasion. Because they heavily doubted that conventional military forces could actually stop a full-scale Soviet invasion of Western Europe, France intended to use short-range nuclear missiles as an ultima avertissement, which basically translates to a final warning. It was a very blunt, direct message. Take one more step, and we trigger nuclear Armageddon.
Meanwhile, over in China, their entry into the nuclear club came with its own totally unique story. When they conducted their first test in 1964, they needed to maintain absolute total secrecy, so the bomb was codenamed Miss Q. The massive 102-meter tower it sat on was called the dressing table, and the detonator itself was referred to as the braid. When the braid worked perfectly, Miss Q exploded in a blinding flash of light out in the Xinjiang desert, officially making China the world's 5th nuclear power.
Finally, we reach Section 5, Ambiguity and Black Markets. As we move closer to the modern era, the nature of proliferation shifts away from these big, declared state programs to something much, much murkier. Two incredibly dangerous realities start to emerge. On one hand, we have state ambiguity. Think of things like Israel's Dimona reactor. These are highly secretive, totally unacknowledged programs that deliberately avoid any sort of democratic oversight. But on the other hand, we have something completely different, and arguably way more terrifying: non-state smuggling. The absolute prime example here is the AQ-Khan network. This wasn't about national defense at all. It was a purely profit-driven black market that was literally selling entire, turnkey nuclear programs to nations like Libya. This shift fundamentally, completely changed the risk landscape for every single person on Earth.
The AQ-Khan network was an absolute massive wake-up call to the international community. We weren't dealing with governments operating in secret underground labs anymore. These were non-state actors pursuing tremendous personal wealth. They actually figured out how to assemble dual-use components by purchasing off-the-shelf parts from completely unwitting suppliers all over the world. It basically proved that individuals, like the Tinner family, who were eventually found guilty in 2012, could completely bypass the world's intelligence agencies and distribute the means to build a literal nuclear bomb to the highest bidder.
Which really just leaves us with a final, incredibly heavy, lingering question. Can the atomic genie ever truly be put back in the bottle? We started this journey looking at a single $21 billion monopoly that required the entire industrial might of a nation. But today, we're facing an interconnected, highly ambiguous global web of secretive state arsenals and completely illicit, profit-driven black markets. It's a profound, terrifying shift, and honestly, understanding exactly how we got here is really the only way we're going to figure out how we survive whatever comes next. Thank you for joining me for this explainer.